Hey biologist, Mr. Fott here. Today I'm going to be walking through how to do our Grape Lab data collection and how to run some of our equations using Google Sheets. So when you first load this up, it's actually going to be a blank page, but what I've done right here is I've kind of made some fluff data just so we had something to manipulate and to work with. So these trials number 1 through 3 and the solutions 1 through 3 as well. These are not going to have any data. However, you are going to insert your own data. But let's just play pretend for a moment that I've already done the experiment. I came up with these numbers. Now what do I do with them so that I can continue on with our lab procedure? So down below, you can see at this second section, what we're going to be calculating is the change in the circumference of our grapes. So if you recall, how do we calculate a change in something? This is going to be the final minus initial. So what we can do in Google Sheets, why we're going to be using this, is that we can actually run calculations inside Google Sheets, which is pretty phenomenal. So what we need to do is let's click on the cell. I'm going to go down to the second section, trial number 1 for solution number 1. And to insert the equation, what you always want to do is start with the equal sign. So I'm going to push equals, and now it's going to tell the program, it's going to tell Google Sheets, I'm ready to run an equation. And what's kind of neat about this is that you don't have to type everything out individually. I mean, you can, but it definitely works with like point and click. So if I know that for the solution number 1, trial 1, that I would like to take my 7.1 final circumference minus my 6.2 initial, I can actually just click on the individual cell, the little box there, and it's going to identify anything inside of C3, whatever the number that happens to be. Now it's going to pull that value. In this case, it's 7.1. Now I can go ahead and do my mathematical expression. In this case, we're going to subtract because we are then doing the difference or the change in our circumference is what we're calculating. So I'm going to do subtract or minus. Then what would I like to subtract from this value? I'm going to subtract my final minus my initial. Again, I can point and click. And when I click on the next cell, which is my initial for trial number 1, solution number 1, happens to be in B3. Now it's going to pull whatever value that is. It's going to pull that number in there. So when I'm all done, I now have set up my equation, final minus initial for solution number 1 in trial number 1. Push enter, and it will then automatically run the calculation. What's pretty cool about this is, let's say you made a mistake and you're like, oh, dang it, we messed up and we wrote the wrong value. It's actually not 7.1, it's actually 7.2. What's pretty neat, and why I like using Google Sheets, and it's a little bit more savvy here to use for data collections, is that if you need to change the values and you set up your equations correctly, notice how our second table, it changed the value because again, we point and clicked our way through the different cells. So that's pretty neat. So I'm going to go ahead and put that back at 7.1 just to finish this out. Now I'm going to continue once again to fill out the rest of my equations, again starting with the equal sign, and I'm going to point and click. Now I'm on trial number 2. So here's my trial number 2 for solution number 1 minus my initial. Push enter, and it will run the calculation for me. Finish it up with our trial number 3, point and click, minus our initial, push enter. Fantastic. Now I've went ahead and I've done all the calculations for the change in circumference for solution number 1, all 3 of my trials. So let's go ahead and quickly fill out the rest of this. Minus this, push enter, equals, minus initial, equals, final, minus initial. There we go. There's solution number 2. Now we do solution number 3. Again, final minus initial, final minus initial, and equals final minus initial. Fantastic. So now we have all of these. We're going to run one more equation. We're going to now do, instead of calculating the change or the difference in our circumference, we're going to calculate the average. So in this case, once again, we're going to start with the equal sign, and I'm just going to start to type in the word average. Now, sometimes Google's pretty smart. It knows that we set the data table up and it can read, hey, you look like you might be trying to calculate either the sum or the average in this case. So I generally try to avoid their suggestions. They're not always correct. They're just trying to make predictions about what you might want. So I'm going to go ahead and type this in myself. So I'm going to start typing in the word average. Spelling does count. So once I type in the word average, once again, I will push enter and I will select, I want average. But notice how this suggestion, it is not correct because it's using cell B8, which is in the title. So I don't want that. So I actually need to fix this. Backspace. Now I'm ready, minimize, to select my cells. I'm going to click and drag. These are the ones I want. I want for solution number 1, trials 1, 2, and 3. Push enter, and once again, it'll run the calculation for us. I'm going to do the same thing for solutions number 2 and 3. Start with our equal sign. I'm going to type in the word average, push enter. It's going to ask me, which ones would you like to average? Once again, click and drag my values for trial 1, 2, and 3, push enter, and I am done. Same thing for solution 3. Start with equals, type in the word average, push enter, click and drag the values it would like to average. Fantastic. Now we've run all the average calculations for this entire lab with these made up values. One final thing we're going to do with this lab is now we're going to take these averages and we're going to make a graph out of this. So the first thing we have to do is select the information we would like to graph. I'm going to graph the averages. So I will now click and drag all of my information regarding the averages. Next, I'm going to use the drop-down menu at the top, Insert, come on down to Chart, and it's going to attempt to make a graph. These graphs aren't always 100% correct. I would definitely take a look at this just to make sure that it pulled the correct information. And I can see at quick glance, this data is not correct. So I see that in the table, or the title rather, it just says average. It doesn't tell me anything, so I need to fix that. The data, it says solutions number 1, 2, and 3. That's pretty good, but my y-axis just says average. It doesn't really tell me much more. So there's some things that need to be fixed within this. So if we need to fix them, on the right-hand side, we have our chart editor. We can choose Customize. Next, we're going to go down to Chart and Axis Titles. This is another drop-down menu. The first one that should be selected is Chart Title. Right now, it says Average. However, you're going to type in an appropriate title. I'm just going to leave it there. Then, once you choose Chart Title, another drop-down menu, you can switch between the horizontal, that's the x-axis, and vertical, which is the y-axis, to change the labels appropriately. It looks like we need to fix the vertical axis. This is going to be our dependent variable. You are all said and done. You've played around with all the settings in the Customize. You can exit out, and you're ready to copy this over. To copy it, if you select on your graph, choose the triple dots, sometimes referred to as the snowman, you can copy your chart. Now you are ready to go back to your lab over at the Google Doc and paste it there. Please let your teacher know if you happen to have any additional questions. Thanks for watching.